Here we are, boys and girls. Grandpa Tim reading some more of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is episode number 4. Now, if you remember, in episode 3, we ended with the troll adventure, where the 3 trolls, Bert, Tom, and William, were going to eat the 14 members of the adventure party, all the dwarves and Bilbo. But Gandalf managed to trick them, so they stayed outside until the sun hit them when it turned dawn, and they all turned into stone. So Gandalf saved them all. So they're just wrapping up the troll adventure. Let's see where that takes us. The next thing was to untie the sacks and let out the dwarves. They were all nearly suffocated and very annoyed. They had not at all enjoyed lying there, listening to the trolls making plans for roasting them and squashing them and mincing them. They had to hear Bilbo's account of what happened twice over before they were actually satisfied. "That was a silly time to go practicing pinching and pickpocketing," said Bomber, "when what we wanted was fire and food." Gandalf said, "And that's just what you wouldn't have got out of those fellows without a struggle. Anyhow, you're wasting time now. Don't you realize that the trolls must have a cave or a hole dug somewhere near here to hide from the sun? We must look into it." They searched about and soon found the marks of trolls' stony boots going away through the trees. They followed the tracks up the hill until, hidden by bushes, they came on a big door made out of stone leading to a cave. But they could not open it, even though they all pushed while Gandalf tried various incantations. It means like spells. "Would this be any good?" asked Bilbo when they were getting tired. "I found it on the ground where the trolls had their fight." He held out a large key, though no doubt William had thought it was very small and secret. It must have fallen out of his pocket very luckily before he turned to stone. "Well, why on earth didn't you mention it before?" they cried. Gandalf grabbed it, and it fit into the keyhole perfectly. Then the stone door swung back with one big push, and they all went inside. There were bones on the floor and a nasty smell in the air. But there was a good deal of food jumbled carelessly on the shelves and on the ground, among an untidy litter of plunder of all sorts, from brass buttons to pots full of gold coins standing in a corner. There were lots of clothes, too, hanging on the walls. Too small for the trolls. I'm afraid they belonged to their victims. And among them were several swords of various makes and shapes and sizes. 2 of the swords particularly caught their eye because of their beautiful scabbards and their jeweled hilts. Now, a scabbard is the sheath that a sword goes in, and a hilt is the handle that you hold it by. Gandalf and Thorin each took one of these, and Bilbo took a knife in a leather sheath. It would have only made a tiny pocket knife for a troll, but it was as good as a short sword for the hobbit. "These look like good blades," said the wizard, half drawing them and looking at them curiously. "They were not made by any troll, nor by any smith among men in these parts in these days. But when we can read the runes on them, we shall know more about them." "Let's get out of this horrible smell," said Fili. So they carried out the pots of coins and such food as was untouched and looked fit to eat, and also 1 barrel of ale, which was still full. By that time they felt like breakfast, and being very hungry, they did not turn up their noses at what they had gotten from the troll's larder. Their own provisions were very scanty, but now they had bread and cheese, and plenty of ale and bacon to toast in the fire. After that they slept, for the night had been disturbed, and they did nothing more until the afternoon. Then they brought up all the ponies and carried away the pots of gold and buried them very secretly, not far from the track by the river, putting a great many spells over them just in case they ever had the chance to come back and recover them. When that was done, they all mounted once more. That means they got on their horses and jogged along again on the path toward the east. Where did you go to, if I may ask? Asked Thorin to Gandalf. To look ahead, said he. And what brought you back in the nick of time? Looking behind, said Gandalf. Exactly, said Thorin, but could you be a little more plain? Well, said Gandalf, I went ahead to spy out our road. It will soon become dangerous and much more difficult. Also, I was anxious about replenishing our small stock of provisions. I had not gone very far, however, when I met a couple of friends of mine from Rivendell. Where's that? Asked Bilbo. Don't interrupt, said Gandalf. You will get there in a few days now, if we're lucky, and we'll find out all about it. As I was saying, I met two of Elrond's people. They were hurrying along for fear of the trolls. It was they who told me that 3 of them had come down from the mountains and settled in the woods not far from you. They had frightened everyone away from the district, and they were harassing the strangers. I immediately had a feeling that I was wanted back. So looking behind, I saw a fire in the distance, and I made for it. So now you know. Please, be more careful next time, or we shall never get anywhere. Well, thank you, said Thorin. Chapter 3 in the book, Chapter 3, which is on page 55. It's entitled, A Short Rest. They did not sing or tell stories that day, even though the weather improved, nor the next day, nor the day after. They had begun to feel that danger was not far away on either side. They camped under the stars, and their horses had more to eat than they had before, for there was plenty of grass, but there was not much in their bags, even with what they had gotten from the trolls. One morning they crossed a river at a wide, shallow place full of the noise of stones and foam. The far bank was steep and slippery. When they got to the top of it, leading their ponies, they saw that the great mountains had marched down very close to them. Already they seemed only a day's easy journey from the feet of the nearest mountain. Dark and dreary it looked, though there were patches of sunlight on its brown sides, and behind its shoulders the tips of snow peaks gleamed. Is that the mountain? Asked Bilbo in a solemn voice. He had never seen a thing that looked so big before. Of course not, said Balin. That's only the beginning of the Misty Mountains, and we have got to get through, or over, or under those mountains somehow before we can come into the Wilderland beyond. And it is a deal of a way, even from the other side of them to the lonely mountain in the east where Smaug lies on our treasure. Oh, said Bilbo, and just at that moment he felt more than ever than he ever remembered feeling before. He felt very, very tired. He was thinking once again of his comfortable chair in front of the fire in his favorite sitting room in his hobbit hole, and of the kettle singing that the tea was ready. It was not the last time that he felt that way. Now Gandalf led the way. We must not miss the road, or we shall be done for, he said. We need food for one thing, and rest in reasonable safety. Also, it is very necessary to tackle the Misty Mountains by the proper path, or else you will get lost in them, and have to come back and start at the beginning again, if you ever come back at all. They asked him where he was making for, and he answered, You are come to the very edge of the wild, as some of you may know. Hidden somewhere ahead of us, in the fair valley of Rivendell, where Elrond lives, is the last homely house. I sent a message by my friends, and we are expected. That sounded nice and comforting, but they had not got there yet, and it was not so easy as it sounds to find the last homely house west of the mountains. There seemed to be no trees, and no valleys, and no hills to break the ground in front of them, only one vast slope going slowly up and up and up to meet the feet of the mountains. A wide land the color of heather and grumbling rock. with patches and slashes of grass green and moss green showing where water might be. Morning passed. Afternoon came, but in all the silent waste, there was no sign of any dwelling. They were growing anxious, for now they saw that the house might be hidden almost anywhere between them and the mountains. They came on unexpected valleys, narrow with steep sides, that opened suddenly at their feet, and they looked down surprised to see trees below them and running water at the very bottom. There were gullies, that means like deep valleys, that they could almost leap over, but very deep with waterfalls in them. There were dark ravines, which is another word for a valley, a small valley. There were dark ravines that one could neither jump nor climb into. There were bogs like a swamp, some of them green, pleasant places to look at with flowers growing bright and tall. But a pony that walked there with a pack on his back would never have come out again. He would sink down into the mud. Yuck. It was indeed a much wider land from the ford to the mountains than you would ever have guessed. Bilbo was astonished. The only path was marked with white stones, some of which were small, and others were half covered with moss or heather. Altogether, it was a very slow business following the track, even guided by Gandalf, who seemed to know his way about pretty well. His head and beard wagged this way and that as he looked for the stones, and they followed his lead. But they seemed no nearer to the end of the search when the day began to fall. Tea time had long since come and gone, and it seemed supper time would soon do the same. There were moths fluttering about, and the light became very dim, for the moon had not yet risen over the hilltops. Bilbo's pony began to stumble over stones and roots. They came to the edge of a steep fall in the ground, so suddenly that Gandalf's horse nearly slipped down the slope. "Here it is at last!" And the others gathered round him and looked over the edge. They saw a valley far below. They could hear the voice of scurrying water in a rocky bed at the very bottom, and they could smell trees. And there was a light on the valley side across the river. Bilbo never forgot the way they slithered and slipped in the dusk down the steep, zigzaggy path into the secret valley of Rivendell. The air grew warmer as they got lower, and the smell of the pine trees made him drowsy, so that every now and again he nodded and nearly fell off his horse. Or he bumped his nose on the pony's neck. Their spirits rose, that means they got happier. As they went down and down, the trees changed to beech and oak. There was a comfortable feeling in the twilight. The last green had almost faded out of the trees when they came at last to an open glade, means like a pasture or a meadow, not far above the banks of the stream. Thought Bilbo, it smells like elves. And he looked up at the stars. They were burning bright and blue, and just then there came a burst of song like laughter in the trees. The song went like this. "Oh, what are you doing, and where are you going? Your ponies need shoeing, the river is flowing. Oh, tra-la-la-lally, down here in the valley. Oh, what are you seeking, and where are you making? The woods are reeking, the bannets are baking. Oh, tra-la-la-lally, the valley is jolly, ha-ha! Oh, where are you going with your beards all a-wagging? No knowing what brings Mr. Baggins and Ballin and Dwallin down into the valley in June, ha-ha! Oh, will you be staying, or will you be flying? Your ponies are straying, the daylight is dying. To fly would be folly, to stay would be jolly, and listen and hark till the end of the dark to our tune, ha-ha! So they laughed and sang in the trees, and pretty fair nonsense, I dare say you would think it. Not that they would care. They would only laugh all the more if you told them so. They were the elves, of course. Soon Bilbo caught glimpses of them as the darkness deepened. He loved elves, though he seldom ever met any of them. But he was a little frightened of them, too. Dwarves don't get along well with elves at all. Even decent enough dwarves like Thorin and his friends think they are foolish, which is a very foolish thing to think, or they get annoyed with them. For some elves tease the dwarves, and they laugh at them, and most of all they laugh at their beards. "Well, well," said a voice, "just look. Bilbo the Hobbit on a pony, my dear. Isn't it just delicious? Most astonishing, wonderful." Then off they went into another song as ridiculous as the one I have written down in full. At last one, a tall young fellow, stepped out from the trees and bowed to Gandalf and Thorin. "Welcome to the valley," he said. "Thank you," said Thorin, a bit gruffly. But Gandalf was already off his horse, and he was among the elves, talking merrily with them. "You are a little out of your way," said the elf. "That is, if you're making for the only path across the water and to the house beyond. We will set you right, but you had best get on foot until you're over the bridge. Are you going to stay a bit and sing with us, or will you go straight on? Supper is preparing over there," he said. "I can smell the wood fires for the cooking." As tired as he was, Bilbo would have loved to stay a while. Elvish singing is not a thing to miss in June, under the stars, not if you care for such things, of course. Also, he would have liked to have a few private words with these people that seemed to know his name and know all about him, although he had never seen them before. He thought their opinion of his adventure might be interesting. Elves know a lot, and they are wondrous folks for news, and they always know what's going on among the people of the land, as quick as the water flows, or even quicker. But the dwarves were all for getting supper as soon as possible, and they would not stay. On they went, leading their ponies, till they were brought to a good path, and so at last to the very edge of the river. It was flowing fast and noisily, as mountain streams do on the summer evenings, when the sun has been all day on the snow far above. There was only a narrow bridge of stone without a parapet, as narrow as a pony could walk well on, and over that they all had to go slowly and carefully, one by one, each leading his pony by the bridle. That's the thing around their face that they lead them with. The elves had brought bright lanterns to the shore, and they sang a merry song as the pony went across. "Don't dip your beard in the foam, father," they cried to Thorin, who was bent almost to his hands and knees. "It is long enough without watering it." "Hey, mind Bilbo doesn't eat all the cakes," they called. "He's too fat to get through keyholes yet." "Hush, hush, good people, and good night," said Gandalf, who came along last. "Valleys have ears, and some elves have over-merry tongues." That means you talk too much. "Good night." And so at last they all came to the last homely house and found its doors flung wide open. Now it is a strange thing, but things that are good to have and days that are good to spend are soon told about, and not much to listen to, while some things that are uncomfortable and even gruesome may make a good tale and take a great deal of telling anyway. They stayed long in that good house, 14 days at least. That's 2 weeks they stayed with Elrond. And they found it hard to leave. Bilbo would gladly have stopped there forever and ever, even supposing a wish would have taken him right back to his old hobbit hole. Yet there is little to tell about their stay. The master of the house was an elf friend, one of those people whose fathers came into strange stories before the beginning of history, and before the wars of the evil goblins and the elves, and before the first men in the north. In those days of our tale, there were still some people who had both elves and heroes of the north for their ancestors, and Elrond, the master of the house, was their chief. He was as noble and fair in the face as an elf lord, that means handsome, and as strong as a warrior, and as wise as a wizard, as venerable, that means mighty, as a king of dwarves, and as kind as summer. He comes into many tales, but his part in the story of Bilbo's great adventure is only a small one, though an important one, as you will see, if we ever get around to the end of it. His house was perfect, whether you like food or sleep, or work, or storytelling, or singing, or just sitting and thinking the best, or a pleasant mixture of them all. Evil things did not come into that valley. I wish I had the time to tell you of some of the tales or one or two of the songs that they heard in that house. All of them, the ponies as well, grew refreshed and strong in just a few days there. Their clothes were mended, that means fixed. Their clothes were mended as well as their bruises and their tempers and their hopes. Their bags were filled with food and provisions light to carry, but strong, to bring them over the mountain passes. Their plans were improved with the best advice. So the time came to Midsummer's Eve, and they were to go on again with the early sun after midsummer morning. Elrond knew all about runes of every kind. That's like a special alphabet. That day he looked at the swords that they had brought from the troll's lair, and he said, "These are not of troll make. They are old swords, very, very old swords, of the high elves of the west, my relatives. They were made in Gondolin for the goblin wars. They must have come from a dragon's horde or goblin plunder, for goblins and dragons destroyed that city many ages ago. This thorn is named Orcrist, the goblin cleaver, in the ancient tongue of Gondolin. It was a famous blade. And this one, Gandalf, was named Glamdring, the foe hammer. That means enemy hammer, that the king of Gondolin once wore. Keep them well." "Whence did the trolls get them, I wonder?" said Thorin, looking at his new sword with new interest. "I could not say," said Elrond, "but one may guess that your trolls had plundered other plunders or come on the remains of old robberies in some hold in the mountains of the north. I have heard that there are still forgotten treasures of old to be found in the deserted caverns of the mines of Moria, since the dwarf and goblin war." Thorin pondered these words. "I will keep this sword in honor," he said. "May it soon cleave goblins once again." Remember, goblins is another word for orcs. "A wish that is likely to be granted soon enough in the mountains," said Elrond. "But show me now your map." He took it and gazed at it a long time, and he shook his head. For if he did not altogether approve of dwarves and their love of gold, he hated dragons and their cruel wickedness even more, and he grieved to remember the ruin of the town of Dale and the burned banks of the bright river running. The moon was shining in a broad silver crescent. He held up the map, and the white light shone through it. "What is this?" he said. "There are moon letters here beside the plain runes which say, 5 feet high the door, and 3 may walk abreast." That means side by side. "What are moon letters?" asked Bilbo, all full of excitement. He loved maps, as I have told you before, and he also liked runes and letters and cunning handwriting, though when he wrote himself it was a bit thin and spidery. "Moon letters are rune letters," said Elrond, "but you cannot see them, not when you look straight at them. They can only be seen when the moon shines behind them, and what is more, with the more cunning sort, it must be a moon of the same shape and season as the day that they were written. The dwarves invented them and wrote them with silver pens, as your friends could tell you. These must have been written on a midsummer's eve in a crescent moon a long, long while ago." "What do they say?" asked Gandalf and Thorin together. A bit upset, perhaps, that even Elrond should have found this out, though really there had not been a chance before, and there would not have been another until a goodness knows when. It says, "Stand by the gray stone when the thrush knocks." A thrush is a kind of a bird. "And the setting sun with the last light of Durin's day will shine upon the keyhole." "Durin! Durin!" said Thorin. "He was the father of the fathers of the eldest race of dwarves, the Longbeards, and he's my first ancestor. I am his heir." "Then what is Durin's day?" asked Elrond. Thorin said, Durin's Day is the first day of the new year for the dwarves. And as all should know, it is the first day of the last moon of autumn on the threshold of winter. We still call it Durin's Day when the last moon of autumn and the sun are in the sky together. But this will not help us much, I fear, for it passes our skill in these days to guess when such a time will come again. That remains to be seen, said Gandalf. Is there any more writing? None to be seen by this moon, said Elrond, and he rolled up the map and gave it back to Thorin. And then they went down to the water to see the elves dance and sing upon the midsummer's eve. The next morning was a midsummer's morning as fair and fresh as could be dreamed, blue sky and not a cloud in it, and the sun dancing on the water. Now the party rode away amid songs of farewell and good speed, with their hearts ready for more adventure and with a knowledge of the road that they must follow over the misty mountains to the land beyond. And that's where we will end tonight, finishing chapter 3. Good night. Grandpa loves you. Bye-bye.